I am here with Jon Winet, who is in the fine
Here.
city of Berkeley. Yeah, here. And John and I have been just chatting and catching up with each other's lives. So, John, as I was just saying, one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you was because I think of you as an artist, and I always think of you as an artist in the absolute broadest way and most complex way that one can be an artist, who works very much in and around community. And with your canvas being entire communities or very large communities. So right now at this point when we're all shut down and inside, how does an artist, how are you responding to that, or other artists that you're in conversation with?
Well, jeepers, Jennifer, thank you so much for your interest in it. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Um, and I do think, my practice is very much a social one. It's community based. I think that grows in part out of the sort of the way that photographers observe the world, especially in the documentary art journalism strain of photography that I do. So we're always looking outward. And if you're confined by four walls and a Zoom screen, the whole notion of there and getting out there becomes a very challenging dynamic. And it's complicated for me because I'm a generalist. Usually, when I'm talking to someone, as is the instance now, they always know more than I do about whatever we're talking about. But I have a really broad range of interests, and I work typically in 3 or 4 time zones with with a sort of active communications. The good thing about that for me is that I'm used to being remotely connected to the people with whom I'm working, at least other than in the time zone I'm in. But being sheltered in place and being unable to have direct contact people, especially with some of the projects I work on, is extraordinarily challenging. And I feel very, very lucky to be in a safe place, to have a wonderful partner, to not have all that much food insecurity. And I'm currently working at the University of California at Berkeley in my final semester at Iowa, where I'm on leave. I teach a class in American Studies called Oakland City, and its initial design was all about encouraging students to produce public digital humanities projects that took them out of the classroom and into a research environment where they were directing their own projects. And key to that was getting to Oakland, which is just the closest piece of Oakland to the Cal campus is probably a mile and a half. But it's a very different place with a legendary and wonderful history and rich culture of all kinds. But for them to go there, spend time in Oakland, eat in the restaurants, go to the museums, photograph, talk to people, explore the issues, they've all done that. And then we're now trying to adapt. So much of what they have to do is very much what I have to do, which is figure out how you can continue. In their case, it's a digital arts and humanities practice. In my case, it's perhaps a little more on the art side, but how do we keep doing the projects that we work on? And it's a challenge, and it's complicated, and it's fun. Uh, I am glad I have a reason to get up every day. And everyone talks about this, but you got to find a way to change out of your pajamas. So anything that does that is good for me. Um, so I work on 3 or 4 projects at the moment. I'm happy to talk about any of them. One is the Oakland class that I just talked about. One is a project in Las Vegas that I've worked on for the last 9 years called Our Las Vegas, which it's a place I've lived, and since finishing graduate school, I've never gone more than a month without working on some project in Nevada. And for the last 9 years, it's been in Las Vegas, where I used to live. Um, I also engage in the quadrennial practice of observing the um US presidential elections. So I'm working on a project in Mississippi about the elections, which is called Oxford to the Ballot Box, the 2020 US presidential elections. All sorts of challenges there. And then finally, for about 8 years, I've also worked on a project which is the digital expression of the AIDS memorial quilt, the 1.4 million square foot social sculpture to which at least 100,000, probably more like a quarter of a million people have contributed to. Um, and the digital expression piece of that is about how do you produce an experience of seeing the quilt when at this point it's so big that it can never be displayed in its entirety? Um, and how do you make the experience of looking at it sort of go beyond looking through an archive or
Hmm.
visiting a list, seeing a list of quilt panels? Um, and how do you make that experience meaningful and that it uh, deeply honors
Hmm.
this this terrible and wonderful sculpture that represents at this point just under 100,000 people who were lost prematurely to HIV/AIDS.
Hmm.
So,
And
in a way,
can I just, for a second,
please.
I think that's so interesting because it's like that's what we're all dealing with right now is how do we take all of a sudden living so much of our lives digitally as we're in our houses and living through screens even more than we ever could have conceived of, and yet having living through this incredibly precarious historical moment, and how to make it, I don't want to say real, but how to fully feel the realness of it while mediating it all through screens.
Well, in some ways I feel lucky, weird term perhaps, but that I've been doing this, and you make reference to it as well, been doing this forever, or at least since 1990. That's a good 30 years that a lot of my professional creative practice has been mediated by a screen. Choosing to do that and having to do that, I think, are two wildly different things. And I feel for the circumstances that some of my students have, where if they're lucky, they can spend 2 hours a day on the one antique computer that their family has, sort of all of those challenges. And artists often live in distressed circumstances. And uh, just to reference, and I'm sorry I've lost my train of thought, but if I talked about a project in Las Vegas um, that I've worked on, uh, in that case, the entire city is its economy, not entirely, but its economy is based on the 42 million people who visit Las Vegas every year. That's down to a trickle, and all of the casinos are closed, all of the showrooms are closed, all of the nightclubs, which means hundreds, thousands of people connected to the entertainment industry, from uh, people who clean rooms to performers, musicians, dancers, blackjack dealers, uh, servers in restaurants. They're all kind of on a standstill. One of the things I've done for close to a decade now is to produce a project called The Daily Frame, which just is a single photograph a day of the city that I am endlessly fascinated by. And now, sadly, the project now has the subtitle Life in the Time of COVID-19, And so many of the images, which are very resonant and poignant for Las Vegans, is images of empty streets, or like a parking lot with no one in it. And increasingly, I'm trying to encourage the photographers I work with, and I act as the editor uh, of this project, but to try to find signs of life, of how people are dealing with it. And some of it is seeing people at Trader Joe's at a distance of 6 feet wearing masks, sort of how we deal with that. But the overarching problem of how musicians and creative people, not just in Las Vegas, but across the country, how they make a living if we can no longer congregate in tight spaces is it's enormous.
Hmm.
Um, and one can only hope that administrations, both at the local, state, and national level, will recognize the need to support independent artists in performing arts and visual arts and across the spectrum.
Well, and you've spoken. I know I had the great pleasure of being with you in Las Vegas. I don't even remember how many years ago that was, maybe 6 or 7, with Dave Gould and some other UI faculty members. And as we're walking around, talking about cities as meeting spaces, and you were reminding me of the phrase of creative collision. And so what happens to cities? I mean, right now they're completely closed down. As I told you, I walked through downtown Iowa City yesterday and it was just a ghost town. But even if things start to come back on board, but in very limited or controlled ways, what happens to that possibility for creative collision?
Well, and I think that idea, and there's a French term I've adopted and I'm very fond of, it's the idea of working as a cultural animator. And it's what I hope that I do when I'm doing what I do at my best, but it's to encourage people to engage in culture. And, I think we've all had a lot of time to think about, if not the meaning of life, certainly like, what do I do? What is it exactly I do, and how is it different than when I couldn't go outside anymore? But I think one of the things we do is run into each other, and that I've looked and I frequent and encourage communities, and I've also to create them where people run into each other, and where by accident you have a great idea, you have a conversation. I've long thought as a professor, I'm at my best in the hallway. I'm at my best running into a student and saying, hey, that piece you did really got me thinking, and I wondered if you thought about this. And that sort of interaction, which is about closeness and a kind of intellectual intimacy, that we have to learn how to do that now. But I do worry about the flickering flame of our souls getting smaller, and that I think for some people this is just a desperately hard time. I'm I have done work in Croatia, and I often tell this story, but I like to say that I'm a optimist, a hopeless optimist, because I think everything is absolutely terrible, and it is, but through collective action and through our will and love and enthusiasm, we can make things better. And my definition, the question usually comes, well, what's a pessimist then? And the pessimist is someone who thinks, this is as good as it gets. I've got mine. Everything's fine. What are you talking about? Get over yourself. So I told the story in Croatia, and a woman raised her hand and said, well, we do that a little bit differently. In Croatia, the optimist says, this is as bad as it can get. And the pessimist says, oh, no, it isn't. And in a way, I think we're living through that now. I mean, I wasn't sky high on how wonderful the world was 6 weeks ago, but now it's frightening. And I think we're seeing potential moves towards martial law and abrogating of civil rights. privacy issues, which we may have to ignore so that we can do this social contact of who talked to who and who's in your circle. All of those things are pretty bad now. But I remain optimistic through our collective action and creativity. Things will get better. And I do admire the governor of Kentucky, who every night at 5 p.m. reassures his constituency that we'll get through this, that things will get better. And I agree to that to this extent. The people who die, they're not going to live through it, and it's really tragic. And I do think it's time to think about what's the new normal going to look like. What is being in community going to look like? Fauci, I'm sorry, Dr. Fauci said handshakes are over. We're just not going to shake hands anymore. I mean, I spent a fair amount of my childhood in France where shaking hands was like, you do that. If you don't shake hands with someone, I mean, you just do that. So, of course, I've forgotten what the question was, but I
Well,
think it was about creative collisions. And I
yeah,
think we'll have to become inventive, but I also think that we may be losing something for a fair amount of time.
yeah.
And that loss may be distributed unevenly.
Hmm.
And it may be that, if we have rapid testing for antibodies and you can quickly determine that you've had COVID, but you survived and you're okay, there may be an active community there. I think people who are older and tend to be more sedentary in the first place or tend to have related illnesses or health issues, they may not be getting out a whole lot anymore for the next year, the next 2 years. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I want to just one final piece here, and is because I have a sense that you're probably connected to and taking in um, very interesting things every day. And is there something that you look forward to either every day or even once a week that maybe you would share with us, maybe other people can check out?
Um, well, that's a surprise question. I'll
It
have
is
to
a
give it
surprise
some thought.
question.
But I will say that every day I'm determined. I'm trying to make 4 million steps this year.
Hmm.
So every quarter, I try to make sure I've walked 1 million steps. And so every day now I go out and walk. And since April 2nd, I've worn a mask. Maybe I should have worn it for this thing, but you wouldn't have been able to understand a single thing I was saying. Um, and I walk the streets. And of course, everyone can do that. I'm thrilled that the city of Oakland, as of 3 days ago, on Good Friday, they closed 10% of their streets to traffic.
Hmm.
So there's 73 miles of streets in Oakland for people to walk and ride bikes. And they've been very clear, you've still got to maintain the 6 feet distance. But I know my neighborhood so much better now, which I bike all the time, but I now walk it. And, there are these little tiny moments. I mean, 2 days ago, I was walking up a street in the Berkeley Hills and I saw a turkey come from outside of a tree, and I whipped out my camera, and photographed the turkey. This is a plot spoiler for those people who aren't the 10 who follow me on Instagram, but the turkey crossed the street. And I thought, turkey must have been trying to get to the other side. But these so my creative practice is down to like, what can I see? And
Hmm.
then I've been really pleased with the work, um, theater companies that are doing productions, the Met, which plays an opera a week, none of which I've seen yet, I apologize. um, some amazing work that Netflix is making available to us. I think these are things everyone is doing.
Hmm.
My cooking chops are better. and I think about, what are we going to eat today? It's like a big part of my life, but, I think cooking with love, which is a term I learned from Marta Goches, who taught me how to make handmade tortillas. It really, those small gestures, and I think your life is full of those, Jennifer, but just honoring the moment and honoring all the interpersonal connections that we are able to make, however remotely. And I am mindful of, the people I love that I can't see anymore, the people I've lost, and how to maintain community.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to get your Instagram so we can put it in the little bio sheet too. So
Well,
we can all see the turkey.
it's best for people who love dogs, and
Okay.
little dog, who I should have mentioned before, since he's really the only thing I think about all the time as well, along with Deborah. But yeah, I mean, I those of us with pets, I think, are really lucky,
Yeah.
and they're thrilled because although I've heard that cats are wondering why their human servants are spending so much time at home now, but yeah, and I think levity is important, but we can't forget all of the things that are happening and all the hardships that many people less fortunate than I are dealing with.
Indeed. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. It's a pleasure.